Hello, in this video today I will be ranking the standalone Batman films along with Batman the Animated Series and Batman Beyond. For this list I will be including Batman 1989, Batman Returns, Batman Forever, and Batman and Robin, the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy, The Batman directed by Matt Reeves, as well as Batman Mask of the Phantasm, Batman Beyond Return of the Joker, and Batman Sub-Zero. So that in mind, coming in last place at number 13, we have, unsurprisingly, Batman and Robin. Everyone agrees that this is a terrible movie, so there's not too much that really needs to be said about this movie, as it's all really been talked about before. The ice puns in this movie are painfully bad. The villains are bad. There's not very many good characters in this movie. The story is not well done. And on top of that, I'm not sure who this movie is meant to be for. I don't know who the target audience for Batman Robin is supposed to be. Because on the one hand, you have moments that are so silly, goofy, campy, over the top, that no adult is going to enjoy them. These moments are just for kids. But yet, at the same time, there are literally multiple shots of boobs, crotches, and nipples in this movie, which is not very appropriate for children. So it's like, is this movie meant to be for children or adults? It's really unclear. But because this movie has been talked about so much, everyone agrees it's terrible. It didn't get good reviews at all. And a lot of the people that worked on this movie have actually been apologizing for this movie for the past 10 years. I don't feel a need to talk about this movie very much. So moving on to number 12, we have Batman Forever. Now, I think everyone will agree this movie is not quite as bad as Batman and Robin. I mean, it's not as much of an absolute and utter disaster as that movie. It's not as much of a train wreck, but it's not very good either. I mean, Val Kilmer is not bad as Bruce Wayne / Batman. The issue is not that he gives a bad performance. It's just that there's not much here for Val Kilmer to work with. The script really lets the character down, especially because there are things that are introduced about Batman in this film that could be really interesting, but then they're not explored very much. And in fact, it's been made clear that this film was originally going to be longer. There are deleted scenes for this movie that you can find out there. If you look it up, you can see what was originally going to be in the movie. And when you do that, you see the potential that this movie had to at least be better than it was. But there's a lot of problems here. The villains, once again, are not good. The problem with Jim Carrey as the Riddler is that the character of the Riddler just becomes Jim Carrey. And on top of that, his motivation is one that's played out and rather cliched, because this movie has a villain who is originally a big fan of our hero, but is then burned by the hero, thus turning him into a supervillain. That's been done multiple other times, like in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 with Electro, in The Incredibles with Syndrome, and in Iron Man 3 with Aldrich Killian. Not a big fan of that villain motivation. Also, when it comes to the character of Chase Meridian, it's pretty baffling, because she's apparently a psychologist, I think, if I remember right. The point is, she's supposed to be a professional psychologist, whatever exactly her job is, but you don't get that from watching the movie at all. You don't get the sense that this lady is a professional, because she does not act like that. Instead, Chase Meridian in this movie, yikes, acts like a horn dog, like a teenage girl with a crush. This is especially evident in this one scene that's pretty uncomfortable to watch, where she puts up the bat signal so Batman comes to where the signal is coming from because he thinks there's some emergency. But then you literally see Chase Meridian walk out in front of Batman in lingerie, and she even later on, right before Commissioner Gordon comes there, she even starts to take off her clothes. Yikes, it's pretty uncomfortable to watch. So, not a big fan of this movie. Coming in at number 11, we have Batman Returns. Now, I know that for people who grew up with this movie, they're certainly going to have nostalgia for it. But for me, this is a hard movie to actually get through. Because while Batman 1989 was certainly dark, Batman Returns is just more unpleasant, even mean-spirited. I mean, you have Penguin in this movie, who is a disgusting penguin, a disgusting man who acts like a penguin. We literally see him eat a fish, bite off a guy's nose, and he lives in the sewers. And on top of that, later on in this movie, there's a plot point introduced about the Penguin killing all these children that's then abandoned pretty fast. And then you have Selena Kyle becomes Catwoman. There's literally a scene in this movie where she eats a bird, and then there's a scene later on where she licks Batman. It's like, oh, yikes. And on top of that, like Batman 1989, Tim Burton does not seem particularly interested in Batman. He shows up in the opening scene, but after that, he's gone for like 25 minutes until he shows up again. So there's not much of Batman in this movie, just like in the first Tim Burton film, even though Batman is the title character. And on top of that, when you look at both Batman 1989 and Batman Returns, Bruce Wayne does not actually grow or change at all. The movies tease him growing and changing, but that doesn't actually happen. So overall, Batman Returns is a movie that I don't feel has aged particularly well. I mean, there are good things about this film, like the scene where Selena Kyle actually becomes Catwoman. But on top of what I said earlier, I think Max Schreck is a pretty bland and forgettable villain. I don't think these two movies do a good job when it comes to the character of James Gordon. Also, going back to what I was saying about the Penguin, I mean, the first scene of the movie shows his parents completely abandoning him and tossing him into the water. And then we see him go into the sewers, and it's made clear that he's literally raised by penguins. So overall, this version of the character is pretty disgusting. So overall, this is a film that I don't have a desire to rewatch, as I find it hard to get through, and I don't feel like it's held up particularly well. So moving on now to number 10, we have, let's see, but I'm gonna say Batman. I'm gonna say Batman 1989. Yeah, Batman 19. Man, it's hard, I will say. But I'm actually gonna go with I'm gonna go with Batman Sub Zero. Now I know some of you out there might not remember this movie. It's set in the same continuity as Batman the Animated Series. It deals with the character of Mr. Freeze, who's definitely one of the more tragic Batman villains in that show. Now to be clear, I don't have any major problems with this film. I don't think it does anything particularly wrong. I think that this is a good movie. I just don't think it's a great one either. And I think that the other films and shows that I'm going to place higher on this list are just better than this film. That's really the main reason why I'm placing it low. I mean, I like how in this film, Mr. Freeze is trying to get Barbara Gordon because she is a rare blood type that could save Mr. Freeze's wife. That is an understandable motivation. And then when the film ends, Mr. Freeze realizes, because he sees it on the news, that Nora Freeze, his wife, actually did get cured. That makes him really happy. I like the way this movie ends. I think basically all the characters are done well here. The story's good. I really don't have like any problems with this movie, but I just don't think it's great. So that's why I'm placing it lower on the list. So now coming in at number 9, we have Bat. Let's see. We have Batman 1989. Now, to be clear, every movie and TV show from this point onward, I think, is at a minimum good. Now, when it comes to Batman 1989, this is undeniably an important film for the comic book genre. Back when this film came out, it was a big deal because audiences back then were not used to a more serious version of the character. This is something that admittedly is easy to take for granted now, because nowadays a serious depiction of Batman is normal, and therefore it's not any big surprise. But back when this film came out, audiences were used to the Adam West version of the character, which is a lot more intentionally goofy and campy, and therefore people were really taken aback when this film came out and we got a serious version of Batman. Also, I think Michael Keaton in both movies actually gives a good performance as Batman. As I was saying earlier, I just think that the way these films are written lets the character down. But I don't think the problem is Michael Keaton. I think Jack Nicholson gives a good performance as the Joker. We see a more comic book accurate version of the Joker in this film, as he uses laughing gas and he uses ordinary things to kill people. Like he kills someone with a joy buzzer and another person with a quill. I like that. It's very different from Heath Ledger's version of the character. But I will say, upon rewatching this film recently, there are things about Batman 1989 that I don't feel have aged particularly well. Like, for example, Vicky Vale's relationship with Bruce, mainly because it just comes off as rather shallow. Also, I mentioned this earlier, but Tim Burton did not seem particularly interested in Batman, despite him being the title character. Also, the fact that Michael Keaton is in this heavy suit that doesn't allow him to move his neck at all is rather noticeable. So I don't think the action in this movie is necessarily the best, because a lot of times it's just Batman standing rather still and taking out people. But I will say the main theme for this movie, composed by Danny Elfman, is undeniably iconic. It's one of the most iconic pieces of comic book film score ever composed, alongside the main theme that Danny Elfman composed for the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, the John Williams Superman theme from the Christopher Reeve Superman films, as well as the Avengers theme by Alan Silvestri. But overall, while I think this is a good film, I don't think it's a great film, as I think there are aspects of this film that haven't held up particularly well. I'm not a fan of the Joker being tied so heavily to Batman's origin. The fact that this movie has Joker being the one that actually killed Bruce Wayne's parents, I'm not a big fan of that, as I don't feel it's necessary to tie the Joker that closely to Batman. But moving on now to number 8, we have we have The Dark Knight Rises. Now, let's just think here. Batman Begins, Dark Knight Rises, The Batman, and then Batman the Animated Series and Batman Beyond. Oh no, there's also Batman Mask of the Phantasm and Batman Beyond Return the Joker. Alright, so coming in at number 8, we have Batman Beyond Return of the Joker. I think this is actually a great film. Now, it's not particularly long, but I think this is an efficient film, as it does everything it's trying to do within a short amount of time. Unlike Batman Sub-Zero and Batman Mask of the Phantasm, this movie is set during the Batman Beyond time period, so the time when Terry McGinnis was Batman rather than Bruce Wayne. This film deals with the Joker coming back after Bruce Wayne thought he was dead. The way this film explains Joker coming back, I think, is really well done and very, very haunting. The way Joker comes back is just pure nightmare fuel, especially when we get the flashback that shows us Bruce Wayne's Batman along with Batgirl finding the Joker and Harley Quinn. The Joker explains how he turned Tim Drake's version of Robin into Joker Jr. It's, oh my god, just absolutely horrifying. Also, I think Terry McGinnis is a good character in this film. I think the visuals are good. Now, the main reason why I place this one fairly, anyway, low on the list is not because I have big problems with this film. I really don't have any problems with it. I just like the other films and TV shows more than this one. But moving on now to number 7, we have The Dark Knight Rises. Now, the reason why I place this film in the middle, basically, of my list is because I find The Dark Knight Rises to be a really mixed bag, because there are high highs, but also a good amount of issues. I think this is the weakest film in Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. I have respect for Christopher Nolan for the fact that he went all out with this film, that he made it more ambitious and epic. There are fantastic sequences in this film, like the opening scene with Bane, or the first fight between Bane and Batman, or the final confrontation between Bane and Batman, or when we see Batman come back. There are some very, very emotionally powerful moments. Once again, Morgan Freeman, Michael Caine, Christian Bale, and Lee and Pat. The actor who plays Commissioner Gordon. For some reason, I'm blanking on the name. I don't know why, but they all give great. Gary Oldman. Yeah, why did I blank? I don't know, but all those actors give great performances. The actress who plays Catwoman, I think, does a good job. Also, I do think overall this did a good job of wrapping up the Dark Knight trilogy, but I just think there's more problems with this film when compared to Batman Begins or The Dark Knight. It feels like Christopher Nolan got so focused on making this film big and ambitious that he made writing mistakes here that you don't see in his other films, that you don't see in the other two films of the Dark Knight trilogy, as there are just more plot holes in this film, more contrivances. Overall, a good way to put it for me is that this film is really high highs, but I don't think it's as well written as The Dark Knight and Batman Begins. And many people have talked before about the plot hole, for example, of Bruce Wayne somehow getting back into Gotham getting, despite Bane putting him in a prison on the other side of the world, and plus Bruce Wayne didn't have a lot. Bruce Wayne had lost all his money, and he didn't have a ton of things on him, and the city of Gotham was under lockdown, but somehow, for reasons that are not explained in the film, Bruce just gets back into the city, no problem. I think the reveal of Miranda Tate as Talia al Ghul, the daughter of Ra's al Ghul, just happened too late in the film, and it hurt Bane, who, for the most part, I think is actually a really good villain. So overall, this film is just more inconsistent, I would say, than Batman Begins or The Dark Knight. But this film is nostalgic for me, as I actually saw this film in the theaters. I even saw it at a midnight screening, which is not usual for me. But moving on now to number 6, we have Batman Begins. Now, I want to make this clear. At this point, all these films and shows are honestly pretty much tied for me. Like, at this point, they're pretty much interchangeable. I could place these films and TV shows in any order, honestly. Coming in number 6 will be, let's see, I'll say Batman Beyond. I'm a really big fan of this show. I think it's a really interesting change of pace, because rather than Bruce Wayne being Batman, being in the suit specifically, this show is set in the future during a time when Bruce Wayne gets too old to actually put on the suit and go out fighting crime. Instead, Bruce is in the Batcave using his technology to assist as much as he can, while Terry McGinnis takes up the mantle of Batman. He's the one who actually goes out and fights crime. Plus, because the show is set in the future, it has a very different visual style from Batman the Animated Series, as Gotham looks much more futuristic here. I think pretty much all the characters are done well. I think Terry McGinnis is a good new Batman. There's some really good villains in this show. Admittedly, like Batman the Animated Series, not every episode is great. There are some episodes you could skip, but overall, I'm a really big fan of this series. And coming in at number 5, we have, let's see, Batman Begins. I'm a really big fan of this movie because I think it's a great origin story for Batman. It's a really in-depth and thorough origin story for the character. Michael Caine, Morgan Freeman, Christian Bale, Gary Oldman, Liam Neeson all give great performances. I think Ra's al Ghul is a great villain. Scarecrow is a good secondary villain in this film. But I will say that the actress who plays the district attorney, what's Rachel? Yeah, the actress who plays Rachel Katie Holmes, I don't think gives a bad performance, but she just looks too young to actually be a district attorney, which we're told in this film that she is. But I think the music here is really good. The action scenes are really good. This is not only a great Batman story, but a great origin story for the character. But moving on now to number 4, we have Batman Mask of the Phantasm. I think this is an absolutely fantastic film. I think it's one that more people have appreciated as time has gone on. So I think this film has actually gotten better as time has passed. I think it's held up really well, because even though this is a short film, it's a very efficient one that does everything it's trying to do really well. It is a great character study for Bruce Wayne. It shows us Bruce Wayne's early years as Batman before he had the full suit, which is something we don't often see. So I thought that was really interesting. I like how this film introduces a new villain that's not part of Batman's usual rogues gallery, and then ties that villain into Batman's origin in a way that's really, really smart. Also, this film ends in a tragic way that's very fitting. And I like how this is a film that manages to appeal to both kids and adults really well, as there are both some really adult moments here. Overall, it's a more mature film, but then you have the Joker in there, who's definitely more lighthearted, and so in that way it appeals to kids as well. So if you haven't seen this movie before, it's one I very much recommend checking out. But coming in number 3, we have Batman the Animated Series. I think this is an utterly fantastic series. I think it's definitely the best Batman series out there, despite it being an animated show, which would cause many people to think it's just a kid show. No, this is a more adult show that is more mature, more serious. It has some pretty adult moments in it. Also, basically all of Batman's villains are done really well. Here, the actor who plays Batman, Kevin Conroy, he does fantastic as both Bruce Wayne and Batman. I think Kevin Conroy's version of Batman is one of the best we've ever seen. I think Mark Hamill gives us the most comic book accurate version of the Joker. I think both Heath Ledger and Mark Hamill do great as the Joker, just in very different ways, because they're two completely different versions of the character that are obviously aiming for two completely different things. But moving on now to number 2, we're down to The Dark Knight and The Batman. Honestly, I love both these films, but for different reasons. When it comes to The Dark Knight, obviously everyone has talked about Heath Ledger. He's amazing as the Joker. But because this has been talked about so much, I'm not going to say much about the Joker in this film. What I will say is that his plan, quote unquote, if you want to call it that, doesn't really make sense if you actually stop and think about it. But I don't think that that matters. That's not something that's ever personally bothered me. Admittedly, I will say Batman is not the most interesting character in this movie. I honestly think Joker and several of the supporting characters are more interesting than Bruce Wayne slash Batman in this film. I think Two-Face is done really well. Harvey Dent's transformation into Two-Face is done really well, though I do wish he hadn't been killed off at the end of this film. But I think overall this is a great film. The main theme for this film is utterly fantastic. The action scenes are great. Pretty much all the characters are good. I like how this is a nuanced and complex story. I like how this film takes inspiration from crime thrillers. And then you have The Batman, which is a fantastic detective story. I'm really glad that we finally got a Batman that really truly feels like the world's greatest detective. That's the title that he's given in the comics, but until The Batman, we didn't really see that on screen, but here we actually see it. Admittedly, this is more of a long film, so it's in certain ways not as rewatchable as other Batman films, but I still think it's a great film that has great villains. I think that Robert Pattinson does a great job as Bruce Wayne and Batman. So overall, it's hard for me to decide which film do I place at number 1 and which do I place at number 2. Because I mean, on the one hand, you got a film that just has a incredible performance, a performance so good that the actor Heath Ledger won an Oscar after he died. Then you have The Batman, a great detective story. I I don't know. These two films are pretty much interchangeable as far as I'm concerned. So I'll just say The Dark Knight at number 1, The Batman at number 2. But that will wrap things up for this ranking. Bye, everyone.